Now, you saw on that map that the California coast is not open to new exploration in federal waters, but the state waters off of Santa Barbara have seen drilling for decades. And now there is a new deal between environmentalists and Plains Exploration and Production, also known as PXP, a deal that could bring that drilling to an end by the mid-2020s. Clean Sky's Dan Goldstein reports.
In less than 2 decades, these rigs just off the California coast could be a memory. Under the proposed deal, PXP would remove 4 offshore platforms and 2 onshore plants within 15 years. PXP would also donate 4,000 acres of coastal land for open space and help Santa Barbara County reduce greenhouse gases. In return, PXP could slant drill up to 17 wells from its platforms into the Tranqueon Ridge, which hold as much as 150 million barrels of oil. Under the new deal, the state would also get more enforcement accountability and the public much more review, both issues that scuttled the deal last year. PXP would also agree to forfeit any profits if it continued drilling beyond the 15-year term of the lease.
It accomplishes the very things that Get Oil Out has been fighting for the last 41 years. Removal of oil platforms and facilities, restoration of the coast, and return of land to the people.
In January 1969, a blowout just 6 miles from the beach spewed more than 3 million barrels of oil onto the shore, killing thousands of birds and fouling the coastline for months. That blowout is credited for spawning the modern environmental movement. Some of the groups organized in the wake of the blowout, like the Environmental Defense Center, are now behind the deal. They hope it will end oil drilling off this part of the California coast for good. But not everyone is convinced.
The Environmental Defense Center still has provisions in this agreement that call for it to lobby on behalf of this oil company before regulatory bodies. That's a huge mistake. And I really don't understand why California has to be the only state on the entire western coast that allows drilling in its state waters.
And it's not just Santa Barbara County that's wrestling with the issue of oil drilling. California voters go to the polls in November to elect a new governor and perhaps a new senator. And the issue of oil drilling could very much be on their minds. Incumbent Senator Barbara Boxer has long opposed oil drilling, but in some polls she's running dead even or even behind her likely opponent, Republican Tom Campbell, who supports offshore drilling. Meg Whitman, who's seeking the Republican nomination for governor, says she's open to it as well, but under certain conditions. She leads her opponent, former Governor Jerry Brown, who touts himself on his campaign website as a fighter of big oil. But some analysts say Californians may be worried about a repeat of $4 gasoline this election cycle rather than another blowout in 1969.
It's a distant memory for the people that were here, and you have a lot of voters that have come in that weren't voting or weren't around or weren't even alive at that time. And so a generational replacement of voters can mean that what was a vivid image for voters in the 70s is not a vivid image right now.
Bruce Kane, director of the University of California's Washington Center, says as oil drilling becomes more popular among California voters, a new crop of politicians are paying attention.
It's clear that something's happened to the attitude of Californians towards oil drilling. Again, 15 years ago, it would have been anathema for any candidate, Democratic or Republican, to really be pushing oil drilling. Now we have 2 years of polling indicating an openness on the part of a majority of Californians to the idea of drilling off of the California coast. So clearly the world has changed.
In the end, it may all come down to money. Governor Schwarzenegger has touted the drilling royalties the Santa Barbara deal would bring in, $100 million a year, and perhaps as much as $4 billion over 15 years. That could lower California's budget deficit. Ultimately, how voters decide in November could determine whether this new Santa Barbara deal is an end for drilling in California or a new beginning. Dan Goldstein, Clean Skies News.
That plan would shut down 3 platforms within 9 years and then a 4th platform by the end of the 15-year lease. Critics of this deal contend it is not ironclad. They say a future governor in California could simply come into office, reject the shutdown agreement altogether, and keep that offshore oil pumping.